I'm writing a horror feature film and I'm taking you on the journey with me. Now, the first thing that I wanted to talk about is really one of the first things that many writers come across, which is how do you actually build a premise? So many of us have these ideas, these little fragments of ideas, these one sentences, these bits of dialogue, these characters, all of this sort of stuff all jumbled together in our mind. How do we actually turn that into a premise? Well, I found a method. I have been reading this book, John Truby's The Anatomy of Story, and if you're thinking about picking up this book, the contents of chapter 1 is worth the price of the book alone, because in the first chapter, John Truby outlines how you actually develop a premise, and I'm going to walk you through those and how I did that for Suckers. So the first thing to think about, of course, is your actual premise itself. This is your one sentence thing. So before that, you've got this big jumble of ideas, and then suddenly it'll hit you. You have this one sentence. For Suckers, it was, and I have written it down in my trusty notebook. At the height of summer, in a busy seaside town, the beaches are invaded by ravenous humanoid sea monsters. This was my inciting sentence, my inciting clause. This is what everything else is built around, and this is what we went off. Now, that's step one. You need to work on getting your idea into a one sentence pitch. Now, obviously, your idea is going to balloon into more than that, but this is the first step. The second part is to go through in this amazing brainstorming session and think about your filmed wish list. You've watched loads of films, you've got all these ideas. What is it that you, as a creative person, want to see? So, for example, in Suckers, we had underwater scenes, heavy prosthetic creatures, explosions, gunfights, snappy smart dialogue, badass moments, a great soundtrack, retro convertible cars, and it goes on for a page. What is it that you want to see in the film? What type of film do you want to make? What are some elements in it? These aren't really plot points. They're more just general things that I want to see in the film. And that's sort of where we go from there. You start getting your mind thinking about what is it that I actually want to see in this story. The second step is the what if section. It's where you get to do some real ideas generation. You get to think, okay, what if this, what if this, what if this? You're not thinking about budget at the moment. You're not thinking about scope or time or how all these pieces fit together. You're just thinking, what's going on, right? So I've had all these ideas about the film. So I'm there thinking, what if? Okay, what if these creatures maybe live in the estuary somewhere, in something that, if you're not local to Southend, you might not know. Southend is on the estuary of the River Thames, and sunken in the estuary are loads of shipwrecks and stuff like that. And I thought of the idea, what if these creatures actually live in one of these shipwrecks? And then I start thinking about other things. I think, okay, what about the characters and stuff? I start thinking about, well, maybe I want some element of the police or something in my film. Well, what if the mob was actually involved with the mayor? Because I really like the idea of a corrupt mayor. I drew heavily on things like Jaws for that. So I thought, okay, what if those two things were linked? You just start thinking about these things. What if, what if, what if? Maybe you might find this helpful to do with someone, but I was just writing these things down. What if, what if, what if? These ideas, again, there's no pressure to be thinking about how do these things all tie together. You're just building this glorious few pages in your notebook of what if. The third thing on your list is to start thinking about problems with your story. I know that might be difficult because in the moment you're thinking about how wonderful your story is, but to start thinking about what are your inherent problems. So, what were the problems of my script? Well, I was thinking about this idea that Suckers is fundamentally a human story with monsters in it. So obviously the problem that I kept thinking about with that was how to keep the monsters still the villains of the story. How do I keep them the antagonists of the story? And that's what I think about. Again, these ideas, they're just planting in your head at the moment. They start helping you think about these things. You're halfway through the process at the moment. The fifth thing is really when you start to bring all this wide selection of things together into a point. And it's to come up with this idea known as the designing principle. The designing principle it's a little bit more than a theme, as John Truby points out. It's almost your mission statement for the film. It's sort of your viewpoint mixed in with the theme. Let's see if I've got this written down here somewhere. A town that exploits the sea for profit and tourism must finally face what lives beneath it. That is the designing principle. That is, see what I mean? It's a bit more of a theme. It's you know, you could say, oh, the theme is environmentalism, or the theme is, you know, corruption, or whatever it is, but those are a little bit too vague concepts. The designing principle helps you focus that down right into, again, a bit more of a mission statement. So number 6, again, you've got all these notes going on, is to start thinking about your characters. And one of the things that I did was I outlined what are some archetypal characters in this story. Again, you're watching loads of films and you're reading books about the type of story that you want to make. So my archetypal characters that I was writing down were things like the out-of-town reporter, the out-of-town journalist, the secretary, the underpaid, underappreciated secretary, the mayor, the corrupt mayor. These are the character that I really latched onto. People like the mob and suspects and police chief and kids and maybe a couple, and then I think about local fishermen. And, you know, so I start thinking about all of these characters and I start to mentally gravitate towards certain characters. Some of you might gravitate towards the local fishermen or the kids or the teenagers or the police chief. For me, it was the secretary. She was the person who I thought, oh, that's something really interesting, because I wrote in my initial notes, she's underappreciated, she's undervalued, but she sees things a little bit differently. She sees what's actually going on where no one else does. And I thought that's to me where the character can really come into her own. So that's the character that I really, really gravitated towards. And in your notes, you'll be thinking about who in your story you gravitate towards, who has the potential for the biggest character change. Not who's the coolest and who can do the really amazing things and who can do the gunfights and things like that. Who has room for the biggest character growth. And that's who you make your story about. The 7th thing is to get a sense of the central conflict. Who is your main character fighting? What are they fighting about? What are the stakes involved? What is at risk? These are the types of things that you need to be thinking about, because they help you determine your central conflict. They help whittle down all of these ideas into, okay, what is at the base of my story? What is at the crux of it? What is the middle of the axis where all that conflict turns? And for me, fundamentally, at the core of this story, it is about a secretary who learns to stand up for herself. It is her fighting against the mayor. Now that's the centre of the story. Obviously we have the monsters and the stuff like that and all that's great, but that is the human conflict at the heart of the story. Step 8 is, of course, to then take that conflict and start to map it out onto a cause and effect level. So you've got things like, okay, how do we start getting from A to B to C? Again, nothing needs to be laid out and set in stone, but just starting to think, okay, well, if this needs to happen, then we need to get from here to here to here. If my secretary is going to stand up for herself, then she needs to be pushed to her breaking point. And how do we do that? So these are all the things that you start thinking about, is how to start laying out that cause and effect pathway. And then number 8, it's sort of alluded to it with figuring out who your central character is thinking about your big character change. What is the crux of their character change going to be? How do they grow? How do they develop? Or how do they regress if you're doing a reverse story? How does your character change, and in what way is their biggest character change? Now, something that I've been looking at with this character change, and a bit of a side note, is your character change should be something that is easily identifiable. A lot of times writers, especially when dealing in certain genres like coming of age stories or maybe love stories or things like that, their character change might be something like to gain independence or to stop being addicted to something or something like that. But that's actually quite difficult because it's not very concrete. You need to start boiling your character change down to a single choice that is really clearly identifiable. Your audience should know the moment that your character has undergone their big change. And that really helped me in solidifying what my character change was all about. The 10th thing is the hero's moral choice. Again, this links into their character change. Towards the end of every great story, your character will have to face the ultimate choice. It's going to be a really important character-defining choice that they will have to make. And thinking about this early helps you build towards that choice, and it also helps you define the character in terms of that choice. So, for example, the secretary who needs to stand up to the mayor. Okay, well, how do we do that? Okay, well, what's that central choice? Well, at some point in that third act, there's going to be a moment where she has to choose between serving the mayor and serving the people, or protecting the people, or fighting the creatures, or standing up for truth. And that choice, building towards that choice, is really helpful in giving the whole of your character change a sense of rhythm and momentum and drive, rather than just have it be some flaky, oh, they gain independence or they gain self-respect or something like that, where it's quite difficult then as an audience to go, oh, that's when they've done that. That's something to think about. And the last thing, at this point you might have quite a good idea of your story, and I'm really flying through these points. If you would like me to go into more detail on any one of these points, please just let me know in the comments. Fortunately, we are limited in time with TikTok and Instagram and stuff like that. The final point is to gauge audience reaction. It's where you actually have to start thinking about the real world a little bit with your story. We can come up with ideas all day in our bedrooms and in our offices and stuff like that, but one of the really important things is to actually start soft pitching your film out into the real world. What is an audience's reaction? When you're sat at a bar or in a pub or something and you tell your writer friends and your filmmaker friends, oh, I've got this new idea about this, this and this. What's their reaction? Is it excitement? Do they really light up, and does it sound like something that they're really interested in? Or do they kind of politely just go, oh, yeah, sounds interesting? You know, think about that. Think about what your reaction is, and think about as well, look at other films. You know, are other films that are similar to this in certain ways but different in others? How do they do? Are they picked up really well, or are you limited more to an independent market or an art house market? Starting to have those early ideas of who your audience is really is going to help you, because then also you've got to remember you are making a film to be watched. As much as you're making a film for yourself and you're making a film for entertainment and to be a work of art and stuff, ultimately people need to see the film. So it's starting to think about, does your film have a wider appeal? So that is me absolutely flying through my process of how I turn my one-sentence premise. Remember that. What that one sentence was: at the height of summer, in a busy seaside town, the beaches are invaded by ravenous humanoid sea monsters. Ultimately, the process that I have just walked through is the process of how I turned that into a fully developed premise that then I could start writing my script from. Now, interestingly, you can also turn your premise, all of these things that we've gone through, turn it into a nice little document and send it out as that initial proposal to people. Bringing on early members of cast and crew and things like that can really help you. And then this document that you maybe make from working this premise becomes your anchor point. It stops you from expanding too much, and it keeps everything focused. So, if there's any of those points that you want me to expand upon, or if there's anything else that you'd like me to discuss, please let me know. I've got some more videos coming, and I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Thanks. Bye.